Welcome to the first episode of the Unpolished Gems podcast, a sequel of 20 Under 20s and the Trendsetters podcast. I'm your host, Jesse K.
And I'm Brian K. Join us weekly as we explore raw, unpolished moments that inspire growth and success of some of the most successful entrepreneurs, athletes, executives, and celebrities of our time.
Over 1,700 days after our first episode, I'm super excited to bring back another episode with my dad, Brian K. Quite a bit's changed. It's been, I think, around 5 years since our first taping. I was graduating high school at the time. The world has changed. I've changed. My dad's changed. Situations have changed. But we're super excited to come back for another episode, especially since I'm now co-hosting this podcast with my dad, Brian. So I think most of you have some recollection of that past episode if you've listened. If you haven't, I would recommend you pause this, go listen to that episode just for context on how different these conversations are. With that, I'm so excited to do this episode with my dad, Brian K. For a little bit of background, he's the CEO and co-founder of Strategic Education Technologies. He also went to Cornell and has been an entrepreneur ever since he graduated. He also mentors a ton of young entrepreneurs and invests in companies. And now he's doing podcasts and following his passion on that with me. So, Dad, thanks for doing this. And I'm super excited to do a little recap 5 years later.
I'm totally excited to do this interview.
Where do you want to start on this one? I think this might be an interesting place to defer to you on. Like, you remember 5 years ago, I remember 5 years ago, life was very different. I was about to start school at Stevens. This is pre-COVID, pre-me double transferring, or trying to transfer twice and then ending up making a transfer. Where do you think would be an interesting place to sort of kick this off?
I mean, I'd like to take it off because, just as for everyone listening, if you didn't go back and listen to the previous episode, we talked a lot about raising someone like Jesse, who had a really rough time early on finding, his path and getting in touch with what, made him tick. And so that first episode was, I think we called it, how to raise an Orchid kid, which, for purposes of what does that mean? It means a kid who's not the norm, who, basically ticks differently. And that's very common with people who are entrepreneurial, et cetera. So why don't we take it from you're 17 years old, pre-college. Let's take it from college to today in the last 5 years, and just some of the radical changes that have occurred both in your life, the world, and our relationship and the parenting relationship, and see if that could help people who may have a child that was just like you, that's struggling with, it could be, and I'm not saying that you struggled with depression, but you did struggle with anxiety, with ADD, and a lot of other issues that I think a lot of kids suffer from today, a lot of them silently probably. So let's talk about how did we get you to go from I am not leaving this house and I'm going to be an entrepreneur and college doesn't make any sense whatsoever, to being willing to leave the house, go to Stevens, and be willing to make that change, which was probably your apex fear when you were a child.
Yeah, it definitely was. And I think, once again, for people that haven't listened to the old episode or didn't listen to the show 4 or 5 years ago, my biggest fear, I think, period, in life was being away from home and living away from home, which I think my friends now will laugh at because I think my biggest fear now is being in one place for more than 3 days. But in reality, I was terrified of going to college, terrified of moving away from home. I told my parents I didn't want to go to college, and they were like, you have to go for a year. Chose Stevens because, number one, great school, number two, 40 minutes from home. But that almost failed within 5 days. I think if not for Mom, because you had a little more empathy and thoughts on that when I really think needed tough love at that moment, because 5 days into Stevens, I'm hating it, being like, college is stupid, which was really a mask for I'm afraid and can't do this. And Mom gave the great quote, you don't have to stay in college, but if you do, you're not living at home. And I had like an oh shit moment, and I was like, all right, I'll stay at college. And then it ended up working out. Why? What's your perspective on that sort of stretch?
So I'd like to dig in a little bit on that first week. You were like, I don't think this is going to be for me. I'm not liking this. It's basically when somebody is feeling massive levels of anxiety. You can refer to it as fear, whatever. We all have fears. and you're jumping out of your skin, and you want to end that feeling, right? So in your case, and by the way, for those of you who haven't listened to the previous ones, in addition to anxiety and ADD, Jesse, used to experience panic attacks when it was severe. And so there was a lot of that was going on throughout that first week of making that transition. So talk to me about like having a parent that was willing to step in and give you tough love. Maybe you can give an insight to other parents who are afraid to do that, especially in today's world where everybody is afraid to say something that may make their child go off the rails.
Yeah, and I think we literally just had this conversation yesterday or 2 days ago that it's interesting how different kids react differently to different things. And I think me, strangely, sort of I thrive off of tough love when needed, not frequent, but every so often I get sort of like if you push me, I'm like, fuck you, I'm going to prove you wrong, which is kind of where I go. I don't know if that's how you guys see it, but that's how I see it. So I think it was important. It was super important for me at that time to have that, because I think if I didn't have that, I would have fallen into a place of comfort. And I think 5 years later, I'd probably be sitting at home doing nothing and trying to figure out what to do, saying I want to be an entrepreneur, but not actually doing anything, or maybe even doing something in practice towards that. But I think I would have missed 5 years of maturity that came from going to college, living on my own, traveling on my own, making new friends. And I think the exponential change in my life as a result of that, I think can't be understated, from literally like 1 to 2 weeks of reinforced tough love that you're going to have to do this, and support, obviously. What was it like on your guys' end? You probably finally thought you made it. You're like, hey, we finally got Jesse out to go to college. And then week in, I'm like, this is DEFCON 9.
So what my observation is, and I'm sure there are plenty of parents out there who may have this with one or more of their own children, is when you have a child that suffers from any type of like anxiety or things associated with anxiety, transitions and change are the biggest factors in amping up the anxiety levels. And that was always the most stressful, and particularly in parenting you. Anytime there was a change from like junior high school to high school, from high school to college, a major milestone, it just was a very painful and difficult period for everybody concerned. But there was also knowledge, after having done it a couple of times, that on the flip side of the anxiety, after you acclimated to the change and it became normal to you, you did great and you thrived. So for me and Mom, it was like, this is brutal. I didn't see this one coming at this age, but he's gonna make the transition. This is just Jesse's way, and we have to accept that this is like, you have to parent the child that you were given, not the child that you think your child should be, because each one is vastly different. It's like same with managing staff. If you manage everybody exactly the same, you suck. You're a terrible coach. But if you understand that every human being is wired a bit differently, and some are motivated through positive, some need a kick in the ass, and some need some combination, then you are more likely to parent or to coach that person properly. So that was my take on what was going on.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting because pretty much through year one of Stevens, and I'll try and keep this sort of summary condensed so we can get to sort of the follow-up stuff, but summary of, I guess, the college experience kind of, I guess, finally came full circle now 5 years later. But went to Stevens. Freshman year was brutal. Like, I was still in my head not connected to college and disconnected, and was like, I'm just going to go do work stuff, which was great because I was working and doing cool stuff at the time. But I wasn't getting involved in college at all. My grades were terrible. I didn't know you have to actually show up to class to pass. I failed the class. I had a 2.7 GPA my freshman year. I was literally like, they were going to take away my scholarship. I was on academic probation. I remember we sent an email appealing, like, please keep his scholarship. I remember that.
It wasn't just like $5,000. We were talking $28,000 a year.
Yeah,
So
you guys would have killed me.
it was a significant, amount of funding based on maintaining a GPA that you didn't maintain.
Yeah, I'm not going to name the guy, but I'm not a huge fan of the professor that failed me, and he ended up getting removed from that school by the end of the year.
So without us shaming that professor, what happened that led to you fully failing a class which totally tanked your GPA?
I'll remember it forever. Like, I walked into your guys' room because I looked at my transcript, and this is like 2 weeks after the semester, and I'm like, there must be a typo. I got an F, and I sat through the stuff. The guy was such a douche in reality. Like, he was just an enormous prick.
So you really like him?
I love him as a person. Like, teaching wise, he actually probably knows what he's talking about. I just thought there was such a more empathetic way he could have done that. Like, he knew the circumstances. He knew what happened. He knew that I knew what I was, like, involved in the class. It was a class on, like, information systems and digital marketing, which is literally what I was doing. And I think his thing was he said he didn't get some homework assignment, which, to my knowledge, I had submitted, and that I missed too many classes, which that I 100% did do. I definitely missed too many classes. Some of them were approved by the school, though, because I was going on speaking stuff, and I was, like, kind of representing the school there, and they approved it. I just thought he did such a poor job on, like, being an empathetic dude. And was kind of like, I don't care if your life is screwed, like, your fault. Which, that is part of college, I guess, and growing up. I just thought the way he did it was in such a prick way. So I don't really hold grudges against people. I think there's like 4 people on my lifetime list, and he's on that. Yeah. But I finished freshman year, have a 2.7.
So everyone just witnessed, and it's rare that Jesse goes there. Jesse's raw emotion when he feels like wronged or angered. And there's literally, when he says there's 4 people, there in my awareness, there really aren't very many. The vast majority, it's so positive. But here's my question for you and for you to reflect on. What did he do for you? What lesson did you learn?
I wanted to prove him wrong. Because basically the way he did it was like, you don't have the academic rigor to succeed at this school. And I was like, all right, challenge accepted. Fuck you.
Okay, so I think this is an important point, not only for you, Jesse, but for anyone listening, is in successful people that I've come across in my entire lifetime, they all tend to have that trait, which is they are doubted. People always underestimate what they're capable of. They may not look like superstars out of the gate, but when you pull something like that, they can't wait to prove you wrong. And sometimes people like you, Jesse, need somebody to wrong you in order for you to blossom and be all you can be. So maybe there's a thank you in here for your professor instead of a fuck you. But we'll give you time on this one.
In 30 years, check back in.
Let it kind of, serenity now, or later. But let's talk about, okay, here we have a kid who didn't want to go to college, finally goes there, hates it, but stays, gets failed by a professor, feels wronged, right? Tanks his GPA, and had made a decision to consider transferring. Why?
I didn't really know where to go at that point. Like, I remember in our head, and we had conversations, it was like, all right, there's probably 3 options. Option A, stay at Stevens, get involved. I didn't have a great social life at that point. Yeah. I was like, whatever, I traveled. Wasn't a great option at that point. Option B, apply and transfer to what I viewed in my head as like schools I was interested in high school. Think NYU, Miami, Tulane, Penn State. Where else did I apply? I applied. So those, or option 3, literally go to a community college for a semester, figure out what I want to do, and then move on from there. And the option that we netted out at was apply to all the schools from high school. You have a 2.7 GPA, and you probably don't have the best shot in the world, but see what happens. And I think it's kind of a story I go back on a lot with people. I'm like, figure out, like, just do it. What's the worst that could happen? See what happens. So I apply. Yeah. I applied to Penn State, Miami, NYU, Tulane, and then literally on the last day the application's available, I don't even know if I told you, I applied to Cornell solely because you went to Cornell and I wanted to be competitive. Granted, in the fact that we went the summer prior. And I said,
Yeah.
how did you and mom live up here for 4 years?
Yeah.
It's brutal. We left a day early.
Yep. So essentially, you shit on me. You shit on where I chose to go to school and meet your mother, and then your perverse nature comes out and you throw an app in just to spite me.
Bingo. So I apply. Don't get into NYU. I'm 0 for 3 there. That's another. I applied ED there, got deferred, didn't get in regular, and then didn't get in transfer. Yeah. Got into Penn State, got into Miami, and was excited about those options because I know friends there and I visit those places. And then literally the last day, I remember we were going on a trip the next day, and I honestly forgot that I still had applied to Cornell because it wasn't even in the realm of possibility that I'd get in. Obviously, I had a 2.7 GPA.
Yeah.
I get in. I'm like, it was like, oh shit. I think you guys had an oh shit too. It was like, how did that happen? We go up, we visit. I'm pondering for weeks. I'll say whatever I'll say that I wasn't the right time. I'll say that I wanted to stay near home for clients. The real answer was I was fucking terrified to go 3.5 hours away from home to Ithaca, New York, which I knew was extremely isolating. End up not going, staying at Stevens. Social life gets exponentially better. Join a frat, meet some of my best friends, live with them, have an awesome time. Except I now get the regret of, did I really just turn down going to Cornell with a 2.7 GPA because of fear? I'm never going to be able to forgive myself for that.
Yes.
And then I was like, all right, I need to fix this. And I remember we emailed the Cornell admissions guy, who still I owe so much to, Sandy Drumlick, who I actually need to go see and say, hey, I graduated and I got my diploma, thank you. And I'm like, hey, can I defer this? I know I said no, and I know I had tough situations with family illness at the house at the time and all of that stuff, but still I want to make it work. I was terrified to be away from home and my family during the time I needed to be here. Can I please come back? And he's like, I mean, you can apply, but you have to wait a year. Yeah. So me being insane, I decided to apply to every single other Ivy League school that spring. Didn't get into a single one, but I tried. and then in the fall comes back around. I applied back to Cornell, this time living with some of my really, really, really best friends, happy in a frat, enjoying my life. I get in this time, which the fact that I got in, again, I don't know what's wrong with them, that they took me twice, but that time I was like, all right, I need to go, except for the fact that we're in the middle of COVID. I'd already done more entrepreneurial stuff since then. And from the education period, let's let that wrap. And the fact that I went to Cornell, had a great last 2 years, graduated in December, still back and forth through May, met some of my best friends. It was probably the single best decision I've ever made, pushing myself and doing something new. So do you have any recap overview from a parental perspective on, I think if a lot of people listened 5 years ago and heard the last 10 minutes, they'd probably be mildly surprised if they were put in a time capsule. But is there any key stuff? I think your guys' support and all of that was crucial, and I think that's where a lot of parents or kids could probably get a lot of value. So do you have thoughts on that you think would be useful? And then we can talk about business stuff, nonprofits, what you've been up to, all of that. What we want to do with the show.
Yep. So let's talk for a second about, man, there's so many lessons in here. Number one for parents, if you guys use your high school guidance counselors were saviors, in my view. They if anyone questions the depth of the caring of a high school guidance counselor, man, they have to meet, Jen and Kelly and the people at Highlands. But we also utilized a private guidance counselor or a private person to help with some of the application process, etc. That was for the first round. When you went back to that person and basically said, hey, I'm planning on applying to Cornell, and I would love to get some feedback. I'm doing it. I have a 2.7, but I have a really cool resume. What do you think? What was her response to that?
First off, I think she was the only reason that I got into college the first time, because I wouldn't have filled out my applications. Literally. She was more of a task manager, and the fact that I would not have got anything done. But she told me I was out of my mind. And that they're why are you wasting your time? That's a sweet thought, but it's over before you even started. Yes.
And so this is for anyone listening who's got high school kids in college that aren't happy at the school they're in. it's a very, very important thing to, like, what is the downside to taking a shot? And I know, like, Jess, maybe you can share, like, how in the world did you get accepted at an Ivy League? Again, it was transfer, it wasn't direct out of high school, but how in the world did you do it with a 2.7, a failed class, competing against Navy SEALs, world-class people who are applying from all over the world for the same seats? Like, how'd you do it?
I think it's a combination of a couple things. Number one, being a legacy did not hurt. I don't know if I would have gotten a second look on my application if I wasn't. So I think that's an important thing to note. But outside that, when I did ask them, like, how did I get in here? From what I learned from them, they look for a connection of three things. Is the thing that you did in the past directly correlated to what you want to study, which directly correlates to what you want to do? And on that, do you have national or international recognition for that one specific thing? Because the way they describe it is like they're looking for like an orchestra of different instruments and talents. So maybe I was the one that got to fill their entrepreneurial podcasting nonprofit bucket. The first time I applied, I didn't have the nonprofit at the time, but the second time I did. And I think I might have fit a unique dynamic that they knew from my ACT scores and my early high school scores that I could succeed in the classroom if I put my mind to it. And I think I described in my essays how the F was kind of a fluke. I retook the class, got an A. And if I care about my grades, which I would at Cornell because I'd be excited about learning from the best in the world, I want to use that campus to the best of my capabilities. And I guess they saw what I believed in, and I am so grateful to them that they took that shot on me, and it changed my life.
So I think what's important for people to hear is that everybody seems to over-index for, I got to get a 4.0 or, like a weighted GPA that's above a 4.0. I have to take all these, AP and honor classes. I have to have 1,000 extracurricular activities. I have to have a perfect ACT score. Can you give people insight into why that isn't enough at a top school today?
From what I've learned, and I think obviously every student, every school is different, but if you think strictly from a high school standpoint, I hear parents and kids all the time being like, my kid's the valedictorian or salutatorian, which is awesome. The only issue is there's 10 or 20,000 high schools in America. That means there's 10 or 20,000 valedictorians, salutatorians, millions of kids that were in the top 10% of their class. It sounds really cool in your town or your neighborhood, and it should be real. Like, that's a great accomplishment. I certainly was never near that percent of my class. But if you're Cornell or Harvard or NYU or any good school, any top 100 school, and you're flipping through and you have 80,000 applications, what sorts the one kid who's a valedictorian from the other kid who's a valedictorian? Nothing. And what sorts one kid who did extracurricular hours from another one who did it, or took 6 APs? I mean, it shows you can do academic rigor, yes, but I think a lot of these schools are looking for an and. Okay, you do that, and what? And I think the and that a lot of them look for is, and it's unfortunate that there's a specialized interest component that people look for at an early age, because a lot of kids, most kids, don't have a understanding of what they want to do at 17 or 16. But I think you can place markers of what you're interested in. So if my friends that have went to unbelievable schools and had experiences that they showed demonstrated interest in the subject matter that they were interested in pursuing after school that directly correlated with what they want to do. So, for example, Cornell, my major was communication with a concentration in persuasion and social influence. I pretty much said my podcast and my business kind of directly correlated with persuading and having social influence and stuff. And I want to use those skills in an academic setting to learn for the rest of my life. A friend of mine who is very interested in business and politics and engineering was a Senate page at 16 and then started a business from there. And there's so many different markers that you can see of people as they're going through this process where it might not be the end result. And 99.9% of the time, it probably isn't. But it's markers. And I think when you went to Cornell 30 years ago, when it was exponentially easier to get in, Dad.
Yes.
What was the I mean, obviously that's a joke and it was a very difficult place to get in, but
I get it.
What was the population like then? Like, did you see kids having unique things out of high school, or was it more grade based in your head?
Yeah, I think like just like everything else, everything becomes exponentially more specialized and intense over like time. And the competition, I don't think the flow of applications was anywhere near as high, right? So the competition was lower. I did ED, right, which is another secret for like again you kind of like there's a couple of things I would share with parents like if you can afford to do this, going early decision certainly demonstrates your desire to go to their school. It also signals in many cases a financial capacity to pay, and that's something that in today's world probably is important to many of these institutions who want to have the ability to fund the growth of their institution and in the future. But as far as like how competitive it was, I didn't think I was anything more special than any other. Good grades, good SATs, started a bunch of clubs, did what you'd expect for, but nothing state class, nothing nation class, nothing.
You turned out all right, though.
Nothing world class. I think I had potential, and maybe I was good. I did on-campus interviews. I did certain things that may have demonstrated something beyond what was on paper that gave me an extra shot. Don't really know, But I do think what you just shared about demonstrated leadership, going narrow and deep on something that differentiates you from every other student, is a marker if your child wants to go to one of those types of schools, which I'd like to shift for 1 second. How important is it to go to Cornell?
I don't think it has any indication on long-term success.
Do you think it's correlated? Not causation, correlation.
I think the screening process, I think getting admitted to one of the schools is correlated. Yeah. I think I think if you take student A and student B and their academic records are identical and and their social records and everything they do is identical, and you put one in that classroom and one not in a classroom, doesn't go to college. Yeah. I think if the one that didn't go to college probably has a chip on their shoulder and might go straight into startups and doing that immediately and higher risk, might be less connected. I think the value of a school like Cornell or any of that stuff is you're in the room with everybody else that passed that screening test who probably, not everybody, but a handful will change the world. And I think what you're getting access to is, don't get me wrong, the professor's unbelievable, the learning opportunities unbelievable, but I didn't look at it from that perspective. Yeah. I looked at it from, I get to meet 4,000 of my classmates every year who a percentage of will be some of the most successful and interesting people in the world, and I get to just hang with them for 4 years, or 3 years, or 2 years in my case. That's what I see the value. What about you?
So I was going to ask, I know you made a lot of trips to a lot of different universities while at Cornell. My experience at Cornell was not completely dissimilar to other people's experience, which is you're in upstate Ithaca, New York. It's uber cold. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful, but it's really cold. And the winters are long. And you're removed. It's a rural area from a city or other types of situations. Why do you think a person who might have gone to a school that has an incredible social life, an incredible athletic program, where it's rah-rah and fun, why would they choose Ithaca, New York, in the middle of nowhere with tough winters over that?
I mean, it's definitely a unique choice for people to make. And like you said, I've had my fair share of travel while I'm at Cornell. Yeah. I think I think it really does come back to the people. You go because the people they really are that interesting. The other students are really, really cool. And for better or for worse, you walk around the campus and you're like, this is really cool. It's an Ivy League school. And especially if you're somebody like me who thought when you were being told in high school and the beginning of college that you can't do the academic rigor of a school, it's you know what, I can. And that part was cool. But outside that, I think people go because name recognition, number one. I think that still, unfortunately, is the main demand for why people go to certain schools. And then I think on top of that, Ithaca is a very unique place. Definitely has cons, but it does have a lot of pros. You are not getting distracted there by other things. Like, you are tucked away 4 hours from New York City in the middle of fucking nowhere. It's you,
Yeah.
other students, libraries, and cows. And, like,
Yeah.
that's really
Yeah.
what it is. And it's nice. Like, you go downtown and, like, the pace is just so much more quiet. And I'll never live anywhere like that ever again. So
Yeah.
it's nice to have experienced it for a couple of years.
Totally 100% agree. And I would go as far as to say it's not much different than why does somebody become a Navy SEAL? Why does somebody try to become a professional athlete? Why does somebody try to become like a Hollywood actor? Right? Like, the chances are slim. You're giving up an immense amount. But the way I look at it is it's like doing a tour of duty in certain cases. Like, who you become in that process can never be taken away from you. And, you know, sometimes you have to go hard and not take the easy route, right? And that choice of not seeking only pleasure, but seeking, like, I'm going to carve myself out of that stone by doing difficult things.
Which is what people look at Cornell as. Like, a lot of people look at it as, like, I'm here to do my tour of duty, and obviously I have fun doing it, but
Yeah.
most people that go there, at least of my friends, could have went to a variety of other more socially fun and still
Yeah.
academically strong schools, and
Yeah.
they choose not to because you want to have the degree and the name and the friends for the rest of your life.
My experience, like, again, as a 54-year-old with all my alumni friends that went there with me that I've kind of kept awareness of and or in touch with, they're badasses. You know, there is something predictive about somebody who works their way to getting into that school. They do, like you said, Cornell is doing an amazing job, as are the other top schools, of curating an incredibly unique and diverse and interesting pool of people to put in this fishbowl to interact with each other. And many of whom just, again, it's not causative. There's many amazing people who come out of, you know, either no college or colleges that are not on the top 100 U.S. News and World Report list. However, there's a correlation between somebody's rigor and intensity and their resilience to basically get pulled into that environment, to stay in that environment and figure out how to thrive in a difficult environment. And my experience has been that there's, like, many of these people have led very successful lives. And I'm not just talking financially, although many of them have had very successful financial lives. They've lived well for the last 30 years.
One thing I think that's important to note on all of this from a standpoint on if people are going to Cornell or where they're going and how they end up and what school they graduate from, I think some people end up getting the one con, I'm sure there's many cons, but a real con of going to a school like Cornell, and a lot of the stuff I see between other schools versus Cornell is people sometimes get soft.
Yeah.
And soft, by soft, I don't mean weak or any of that or less smart. By soft, I mean satisfied with the normal route that you're supposed to take out of an Ivy League school, which is one of 4 options: investment banks, consulting, becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer.
Yeah.
And those are all great industries, and, like, I've had the opportunity to work in banking and have had an awesome experience in that, working within a bank. The issue that I have a lot of the time with the whole process on that is I think a lot of the entrepreneurial ideas, and it's an issue I have with Cornell entrepreneurship in general, is I think that excitement to go take risks and do stuff kind of gets flushed out by the overarching theme of you got this degree so you can go work in a high-paying job.
Yes.
Which is just a dynamic that I think is a real thing that you don't really see at some other schools.
So I'm going to bring up a quote that a friend of mine mentioned to me on a hike this past weekend, which was, there was a Chris Rock special recently. Didn't watch the whole thing. Don't claim to have loved it. But he brought up a line about the difference between Chris Rock and his children. And Chris Rock said, the main difference between me and my kids is I identify as poor and they identify as rich. And even though Chris is clearly wealthy and highly successful, he didn't grow up that way, right? And I can relate to that. I'm not saying, I was brought up in poverty. That's not but my story is that my dad and my parents, he was a bootstrapping entrepreneur, and it was feast and famine in my household my entire childhood. And it ended off in famine. During my college years, towards the latter part of them.
I think it's an important thing for people to understand, like, what actually doing entrepreneurship and taking that dive looks like sometimes, especially in your circumstance, which you don't talk about openly usually.
Yeah. My dad he kind of had the same trait that I think a lot of entrepreneurs have, which is I don't want to work for anybody ever, 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 ever. Right. And there's some good to that, but there's also some negative, and it depends on how that person is wired. In my dad's case, he was seat of the pants, bootstrapping kind of an entrepreneur. So he had periods where there was high levels of success. And actually the period that was the most was during my 4 years of high school. But then there was reversals, and I'll kind of transfer over to what my philosophy was that came out of this. But it ended in the destruction of not only his credit but my credit and my brother's credit, because in order, and this is not an unusual case for entrepreneurs, some of them in the moment make decisions like, hey, I'm going to get back on my feet and I'm going to make it happen again, right? So I experienced like the high highs, but then the low lows were cars being repossessed, heat being shut off, hot water being shut off, phones being shut off, cable being shut off, and insecurity. I just remember a lot of insecurity. So we lived in a really kind of upper middle class, affluent kind of neighborhood. So nobody would ever really know, unless you kind of were in my household and listening in on these conversations, that we were struggling. I mean, during periods of that situation, and it was pretty brutal. And as a kid, it left me with a feeling of a lot of insecurity. And then graduating, but by the way, as I'm graduating Cornell, this all started to unhinge. And these credit cards that were taken out in order to finance like a rebirth of his business career, he didn't have personal credit, so they were taken out in mine and my brother's name. We didn't understand that. And as a result, it didn't work out well in that time frame for him. So it destroyed my credit. And so I was a very like conservative, pay my bill on time kind of a person. And then suddenly I'm graduating from Cornell, and I did not do on-campus interviewing. I did not have an internship. I did not have a job waiting for me. I did not have a funded business, and I had no credit. And I had met your mom and kind of knew in my heart at that point in time, which is kind of crazy when you think about my age at the time, that I was going to end up with her. So all I wanted to do is like start my life. And I came back home into chaos. Their financial life was unhinging. My financial life sucked because I had no money and no credit and no job.
How long did it last? Like, while you're starting your business through your 20s and trying to get engaged, were you just cash only? Like, how long did that last?
Honestly, 11 years. But, let's get back to your professor earlier and my feedback about your professor, right? So, as you can imagine, as a young guy, I was pretty pissed, right? And that could ruin a relationship with a parent, right? Well, you guys, that I still have a close and loving relationship.
Saw him yesterday.
We just saw him, right? And shit happens. And we'll get to that in a moment, because I do want to cover that, you just lost a grandfather and I just lost a father-in-law who I was insanely close with. But the insight being that, like, you only have one set of parents and, and a certain number of siblings. Like, don't fuck those relationships up. And by the way, here's how I've kind of come to terms with it. Like, number one, without trying to, he did me the biggest fucking favor anybody could have ever done for me, right? he turned me into an alley cat and into a badass motherfucker, which I would never have been. I would have been soft because I grew up in a comfortable neighborhood. But as a result, it like flipped the switch inside of me, which probably was present to begin with, that I have a fighter in me like you do. And it was like, there is no fucking way that this is going to determine my future. Like, I am getting married to your mom, right? I knew that I wanted that. I knew what future I wanted. And it was like, okay, this is the reality. No credit, no money, want to start a business. Fuck it. You know, like I've got zero to lose. And I also know I don't want to stay in their house because they were going through very rough times. And just because I am sensitive as a person, I felt their pain. I experienced their pain. And I was 21 years old. I should have been a happy dude, right? But I was feeling it. And I was like, it permeated everything I did. So all of that to say that it gave me the greatest incentive on the planet to make shit happen. Because I had nothing to lose. I couldn't go much lower.
Yeah. I think that's just an important thing for people to know, because I know you don't talk about it, and I think it probably fuels a lot of the stuff that you do now and a lot of your decisions following that. Something you talked about, which I think is important and I want to talk about. Obviously, my grandpa, your father-in-law, Herman, passed away recently, relatively unexpectedly. I mean, granted, at 85, I don't know how unexpected any of this stuff is, but sort of the suddenness was definitely tough. And at least for me, Logan and Lily, it's our first grandparent, thankfully, that we've had pass away. So any core, the way his funeral went down and that whole process showed me what living a really good life looks like when you have 300 or 400 people showing up to your funeral and your burial when you're 85 years old and it's not people just saying nice things about you, because I've been to funerals where people say nice things about you,
of course,
but where everybody's getting on and crying, talking about how he changed their life.
Yeah.
Could we just reflect real quick on what that whole process has meant to you and how you sort of see the next 40, 50 years of what both of our lives look like as a result of that?
Yeah, and then I would also like to flip it and have your insights and feedback. Mine was like, my father-in-law was a blessing to me because, you know, at the time, as I just kind of went through and you saw my emotion and how that triggers my emotion to talk about it, I had a conflicted relationship with my dad during those years until I kind of processed it, looked at the lesson behind it, and forgave, right? But in the case of Herman and my relationship with him, I saw a man who basically just emanated nothing but giving, kindness, compassion, and just lessons that were very important for me to understand at that point in my life as I was heading into getting married to mom and to eventually becoming a dad, right? And just kind of reflecting on what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to live a good life? Grandpa was never the guy who went after the money. He had a comfortable life, but that wasn't what defined his life. So for me, what I witnessed, and I want to hear what your thoughts were, was, just a person who, his family, and that was what was important to him. And he was a great reflector for everybody. He was you felt heard, you felt seen, you felt understood, and most importantly, you felt loved by him. And apparently that meant everything, because for an 85-year-old man to pack a funeral home, which is so rare, to have people fly in from all over the country for an entire week, to me is reflective of living a really, really good life on this planet. So what was your takeaway from your experience with Grandpa?
Yeah, I mean, my takeaway was he always showed, I think, what real struggle is like. My problems felt very real to me, but he was born into the Holocaust.
Right.
And moved from Belgium at 4, and half of his family never left Europe because they got killed. Yeah. And I think that's real resilience. And although I think it might cause some of the paranoia and anxiety problems on this part of the family, I think it teaches you true value of what real difficulty and getting through stuff does. And then he taught how to give back. Like you said, he didn't chase, he almost deferred for money. Yeah. His whole life goal was taking care of people that couldn't pay him. Yeah. Like he was an unbelievable basketball player, walked on Division I basketball, became a doctor in the Army, and then literally went as a doctor in Paterson, New Jersey, which for those of you not from around here is not the nicest area, probably one of the most dangerous cities in the Northeast, if not America. Yeah. And worked with children who had severe developmental disabilities who were kind of left by their parents, and he took care of them. And I think it just taught me, like, especially in the entrepreneurship space, like, values are, I mean, obviously be a good person, but it's make money, do this, and try and maximize that. And his whole life perspective was, I don't really care that much about that. I care about deep relationships and giving back and having people be thankful and grateful to be in his life. Yeah. And at a funeral, I've seen a lot of people who were quote unquote hyper successful who had nowhere near the turnout and lasting legacy and impact that he did. So it's just a good pause, and obviously an unfortunate circumstance, but a good pause and reflect on how to do both together. And try and live a life where people have really strong feelings about you and you feel like you did the right thing.
Yeah. I mean, just to punctuate that, and then I do want to talk about how you've coped and conquered your anxiety and fears and what, and some of the other like things like giving back and making lemonade. I do want to make sure that we do that. But to reflect on the funeral, I've been to quite a few, sadly, recently because of my age, and also like early on. Yeah, I'm getting there. But the thing I've never heard someone go up there and say is, Bob so-and-so was a really rich man, and he conquered the business world and he slayed the boardroom. That dude knew how to allocate capital. He was fucking amazing. I've literally never heard any person say anything even remotely close to that. And like I have heard a lot of strained speeches from people who had conflicted relationships and they want to say nice things when somebody is no longer with us. And then I've heard genuine things, and they're almost 100% about how that person made them feel about themselves. It was so, people will admire you for what you have done, but they will love you for how how they make you feel about yourself. And he was amazing at that. So now just to switch over for a second, how did his influence have an impact during COVID on you starting a not-for-profit charity? And maybe you could give a little bit of feedback on that whole process.
Yeah, so that was COVID, obviously. We're literally probably exactly 3 years out from the launch when we're taping this today, which is crazy. Yeah. It both feels way longer and way shorter at the same time. The reasoning behind it was I get sent home from Stevens at the time, and all of our social lives are obviously cooked. Like, there's nothing happening anywhere. Yeah. And my uncle's a doctor. My grandpa was, I think he had just retired, at the time. But they're both doctors. And I just saw how negative COVID was, both for doctors and obviously for the general public. And the general tendency of grandpa came through. I'm like, well, what are you going to do about it? Like, how are you going to give back? You have a unique skill here. How are you going to be able to give that back to the community? So my good friend Alex Scheinman and I were like, all right, let's see if we can figure something out here. And obviously, I had no experience doing nonprofit. I had done my consulting and my podcast, and that's the extent of my business knowledge. So we were like, all right, let's figure this out. So it started with me and Alex, maybe 5 of our friends. We got on a Zoom, and we decided we wanted to raise money for Feeding America, the Direct Relief Fund, and the CDC Foundation. We tried to pick one for food insecurity, one for research, and one for doctors and frontline workers. And very quickly we realized that, hey, wait, a lot of kids need a social life right now and a community because they just got that stripped from them. So within 30 days, we went from us 2 to 300 kids. And literally, you remember how insane this was. Every night from 9 p.m. to 3 in the morning some nights, we would get on Zoom for 80 straight nights, literally 7 days a week. Because think about it, there was no like sense of day or time during COVID. So these weren't crazy hours, but every single night we would get on. We raised over $125,000 in COVID relief in a month in 45 days. Met literally some of my best friends. That's the best part out of it. I met some of my best friends ever that will be friends for life from it. And it was just a good experience on like testing out not-for-profit, feeling like we did something when we had a unique, very short timestamp to try and make an impact. And I think we, number one, helped contribute in the very small way we did. And number two, gave a lot of kids, more importantly, an opportunity to build community and develop friendships in a time where that was taken away from them. And three, networking. Like people met business partners, friends, relationships all through this thing that we started out of the basement.
Yeah.
And we did it all on Zoom, and it was a really good experience. And what was our whole family kind of got involved default because I kind of forced it down everyone's throat, but what was your experience during that period?
I mean, my observation, which I want you to share with people, which I think people probably would be interested in knowing is, like, you talked about, like, connections, networking, friends for life. What is your secret, Jesse? Like, I think it's your superpower, right? Everyone wonders, like, how the hell does Jesse know everybody? How the hell does Jesse get to know everybody? Like, how the hell did you get these guests when you were like some dinky 16-year-old, kid from like Upper Saddle River asking like luminaries to like who are introverts like Jack Dorsey, who never does interviews? How do you do it? What's the secret?
I don't think there's a secret, number one. The podcast, I literally marked down to like, I was just more resilient than everybody else. Like I sent 350 emails a day, legitimately, every day for 6 months to get people on with no shame.
Yeah.
So that's a hard stop on that one. I disconnect that from networking. That one was just like, I'm not going to stop until I get everyone I want. Yeah. And it worked. From a networking perspective, it's funny. Like people, it's so strange because the last time we taped this 5 years ago, I would have begged for friends. Like, that's the part where I think it's only been 5 years, and at that point, I mean, I had my friends from home, but nowhere near the level. Like, I was actively searching for a new community and friends outside of my business friends who I had at that point who were still some of my best friends ever.
Yeah.
I would, like, it was just different. First, now, I mean, I'm incredibly lucky that I have so many great friends and such a diverse standpoint. What it comes down to, I don't know. I think it's like I try and show up when I can for things that I don't think most people show up to.
Yeah.
I'll make the trip.
Yeah.
And I actually genuinely care and am interested in what people are doing. Like, I don't look at stuff as like transactional relationship. Like if I'm your friend, period. It's not like I'm your friend for this period while it's convenient to be your friend.
Yes.
And I just try and show up, and my favorite thing is connecting my friends with other versions of my friends because then I get to be friends with both of them. And generally there's some upside for both of them to meet. So people like to come to me to meet other people.
Yes.
What's your take? That's like,
my take is I think you've identified, like, I see you as a true connector. And also I see you as a true giver. Like there's actually, there were books written about like takers, givers, and whatever they call it, like exchangers, where it's tit for tat, right? You aren't tit for tat. You're give. You are give. And there's danger initially to being that guy because you could get taken advantage of by takers.
Which I did.
Which is important. Which is important to understand. But what happens, and there was a long-term study, but I think the guy's name is Adam Grant, who's a professor. And what he found was that the giver ends up exponentially ahead of the exchanger and definitely the taker. But they do get taken advantage of initially, and then they have people who become gatekeepers. And those gatekeepers prevent the takers from taking advantage. And and you also learn how to create boundaries. And you learn when to take somebody out of your life if need be, which usually you get better and better at understanding who you're dealing with. But the fact that you're non-transactional, this is a big deal because so many people in the business world, in my experience, they talk about this and it always sounds transactional to me. You got to show up and do this and that and the other thing. But the motivation behind it is to get something back. And in your case, it isn't. You have always tried to make yourself indispensable and helpful to any person like in need, whether it's grandparents, whether it's like one of our closest friends who lost their child, whether it's just us, your friends. Like, they know that if they call you and say, hey, we've got this thing going on Saturday night, will you fly out to Chicago? Jesse K will say yes to that. You are the guy from like the Jim Carrey movie who basically, it's like he did this experiment where he just said yes to everything. You kind of operate that way. You like almost never say no. And you have this very special trait of just being available to the people you love, where like, yes, you're always on planes and trains and automobiles, but you also spend quality, meaningful time with your grandparents, with your friends, with me and mom, with your siblings, and you care and take an interest in other people. It's not, hey, have you heard about my latest conquest and what I'm up to? It has nothing to do with them admiring you and what you've accomplished. It's all about them.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting component. Like, I think it's a less of about me thing and more of like, in general, people can have great relationships with people if you take away that. I think too many people look at friendships as transactional. Like, in my head, I just want to make a ton of friends, and if some of them in 30 years are super successful, sick. And if they're not, sick. Like, I don't care. I just like having cool friends that are doing. I care less about what you're doing today and more, are you an interesting person? Is your family nice? Do I enjoy spending time with you?
Yeah.
And are you there? And that's kind of it. Like, that's really the number one thing I go for. And thank you for the kind words. I don't think they're that fully accurate. I just am trying to do what I can on most of this stuff. And it's worked so far, so I'll keep seeing it through. But I do think saying yes is a very easy thing people can do to stuff. Just as easy as saying no, which you should do in the right stuff. But like, when somebody calls you excited about something and you can make it work, you should make it work. Like, why would you not? Like, I'm going today to a conference. Like, do I really want to go to this? No, not really. It's a 3.5 hour drive each way. But am I doing it because I get to see my friends who I want to see? 100%. And is it the right thing to do because the group has been super supportive the entire thing? 100%. So, like, that's a perfect, like, do I want to do it? No. Should I do it? Yeah. And will I do it then? Absolutely.
So I want to end off with conquering fear, or maybe that's a bad way to put it, because I would say finding courage maybe is the better way.
Yeah, I don't think I've conquered yet. I don't think you ever do conquer.
I don't know if we ever do. So I want to speak to that for a second. Like, just one quick observation to end off the last conversation, which is, I think if people focused more on how to be present for people they love than impressing them, they'd be a lot more lovable. And if they want more friends, that they should become the friend that they want other people to be to them. So many people start by thinking, I would like more people to do this for me and that for me, instead of like, maybe I should be doing those things for people, and then I will attract what I am. But I'm never going to attract people like that if I don't behave that way myself, right? So I think that that's what you've demonstrated. And now let's kind of just, I'm going to fast forward and go to, you are a guy who didn't like leaving the house. I mean, for real. Like, you didn't even, you almost did school refusal back when we were younger. You had a tough time going like to sleepaway camp, teen tours, real panic attacking, anxiety, like apex kind of fears, which led to the college fear or whatever. Now, fast forward, you did a little like infographic on all the places that Jesse traveled to, like I look at you as like, where's Waldo? Around the like globe and around the country. And it was fucking insane in my view. Like it was just a bunch of lines flying like do like every week all over the world by yourself, navigating planes, trains, and automobiles. How do you go from almost school refusal, not being able to be in sleepaway camp, to traveling all over the world and the country by yourself?
I do think this is an important one to talk about because, once again, if we're tying it back into the last podcast, like, I was terrified of traveling.
Yeah.
Like, I'm the kid who wouldn't sleep at my grandparents' house overnight because I was afraid from being from home, which is now, honestly, like, it doesn't seem like the same person, which is insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, I traveled. So I think last semester I was traveling 14 of 16 weeks, which is insane.
Yeah.
How do I, like, why did I do it? It was very strange. It connected with, I had to start traveling at some point for work, for speaking and for consulting stuff. And it was weird because I'd always had a deep fear about travel and going away. And then it was for work, and I was like, oh my God, I'm excited to go to... I remember the first time it happened where I felt excitement was I was going to... Because the first time I had to travel for work, I wasn't excited. It was with you. We were going to Canada for a speaking thing, which was cool, but it wasn't like me on my own. First one I had on my own where the flip really switched was I was going to LA. I was speaking at a panel prior to the ESPYs. Do you remember this? This was right around when I started school. Same time, probably right... This must have been 2 weeks, literally 2 weeks after our podcast aired.
Okay.
And I went to the ESPYs, and I was so excited because I love sports, I love business. I was speaking on a panel. I knew that I was going to get to go to the ESPYs, and I had this realization, like, wait, I still have the same gut feeling that I felt when I would be scared, but my brain is telling me excitement, not fear.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I was like, holy shit, I just need to tell myself I'm excited for travel, and then I won't feel anxious. And I'll still have some of the feelings of unease, but I won't feel scared.
Yeah.
And then I started connecting my travel with work stuff. And I realized that if I'm traveling for something that I'm choosing to do, I love it. And literally, that minor switch in my brain of the same physical feelings can happen.
Yes.
But it's the way you look at it.
Yeah.
And it's a version of excitement rather than fear.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally I'm going to Europe next Thursday. Like, part of it with friends, part of it alone, and I bounce around all the time. And It's just like the change in mental state was really what I think was responsible for it. What did you like? Have you noticed anything net of that you think was worth bringing up that you've?
recognized? I mean, because I don't want to say things that are like that seem trite, but. They say courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And that's what you did, right? Like, you did feel it and you did it anyway. Then you converted it from feeling like it's a bad feeling to, oh, I'm excited. I'm not afraid. I'm excited, right? So you changed the way that you interpreted those feelings, those physical sensations that you in the past had interpreted as bad, which creates panic and anxiety. Like, if it's like, oh my God, this is bad, right? And then the final one is that you felt that you were in control by making the choice to do something versus having it thrust upon you. When you feel that you have to do something because an outside force is requiring you to do it, it takes away your autonomy and sense of control. And when that happens, I feel like you feel panicky. But when you need a ripcord. You need a ripcord, and you need to feel like you are in control. It's that you are owning this. You have chosen this.
Yeah, I agree. What's been over the last 4 or 5 years not even from an anxiety perspective, more from a life perspective before we wrap this? You, 5 years ago, were running the same company you're still running today, that you've run since you graduated, that you've run for probably 25 years, if not longer.
Yeah.
Same partner. What's changed in your life from wanting to do this podcast with me and being open to doing it?
Yeah.
You've started doing a little bit of angel investing alongside with me, with friends' companies. Where do you see the next chapter. Like, let's say 5 years is a chapter, and we're probably going to do, I mean, obviously, we're doing probably hundreds of these between our next 5-year chapter. But what's changed over the last 5, and where do you see the next 5?
I mean, a lot has changed over the last 5. COVID, like, there was a lot of painful experiences and reinventing things and myself over the last 5 years, and having recognitions, both me and my partner. It's like, I joke with my partner Tim all the time that, like, if you're like in a band, right? Like, bands break up because what? Like, you're with, like, he's not my wife, right? But he is my work wife. But there's no children, and, we're not intimate with each other, which helps in the maintaining of a deep bond for long periods of time. He's just like, he's like a brother to me. But even your brother, when you get in a work situation and there's a lot of stress and there's like change that happens in a person's life, you have children growing up and things happening, it can make people say, it's time, I'm done. Well, that kind of got thrust upon us during COVID with one of our companies that we had other partners in. And just to summarize that real quickly, a couple of things happened. It reversed the profit of that business, and it went from profitable to unprofitable like that, right? Because there was no more live workshops, no more live events. All the people who were submitting things to that particular division stopped. And it was like, holy shit, right? We've got these partners. I don't think we're aligned on values, goals, and why we're doing this to begin with. But now it's uber unprofitable, and we have tough decisions to make. And we went through a really tough and stressful period. It ended up, it was either like, do we want to bankrupt this thing? Well, no, it's really horrible to have to do that. Like, that's another 5 or 10 years of pain. Like, and what we ended up working out, which was the best of all situations, was we ended up selling it to one of our VIP advisors who I love. And it turned out to be an amazing situation. And we turned lemons into lemonade in that situation, which is one of my biggest lessons in general, is like, if you're going to do this, if you're going to choose this life, which is not an easy life, or any life where there's challenge and it's not a silver spoon situation that's being given to you, then you have to learn to look at everything as an opportunity. And like, every challenge is an opportunity in disguise. Every challenge is like, if life is a school, and that's my purpose, and my soul was put into this body to grow the fuck up as a soul on this planet until I lay this down, then I need to keep having lessons. And the only way I'm going to accept lessons is through challenges. Because when things are good and easy, you don't really change. Right? It's like you're kicking back, you're smoking cigars, you're hanging out, you're doing whatever you enjoy doing, which is amazing. And you should do that when things are good. But what jolts you is when things aren't so good. And it makes you kind of have like a wake-up call. So what's changed? Priorities. Who do I want to be a hero to? How do I want to spend my time? What do I want my second chapter to look like? Right? Holy shit, I'm 54 years old. How did that happen? I want to live another 50 years in this body. Well, I better take care of it, right? I better get in killer shape. I better maintain that. I better learn how to do that, right? And
yeah, because you're clearly obese right now.
Well, I mean, you think about look, to me, defining like healthy isn't being like, I don't want to be on steroids. I don't want to be on performance enhancing drugs. I want to have proper nutrition, proper conditioning, so that I give
Which,
myself...
for the record, my dad might be a little bit out of his mind, but when I tell you he has a coach, that might be the understatement of the century. He has his workouts, what is it, weekly updated, and his meal plan stuff down to like a science. He weighs his food. He's got a whole game plan. But he has a six-pack, so...
Well, thank you, Jesse. But my philosophy in general is when you've placed importance, like, again, if there's a couple of buckets... family, fitness, finance, friends, faith. Okay? I don't know how I just pulled those F's out of my butt.
5 fives? You pulled that out of your ass, but that was impressive.
Pulled that right out of the butt. But those are like the big buckets, right? And then you try to set meaningful visions and goals for each one of those things that you'd like to basically bring into reality. So for me, I was like, I want to live in this body until I'm over 100, but I don't want it to be degraded. Like, to me, there's no joy in being 90 years old and basically you can't walk, you can't move, you can't be physical, you can't interact. I'd rather be out of here. So what do I got to do for that? And moving forward, my goals are pretty simple. Like, I'd like to do the parts of the business that I enjoy and not have to spend more than 5-10 hours a week on that. Okay? I'd like to take off a week every single month for the rest of my life. Okay? At minimum, right? So 5-10 hours a week of actual meaningful effort, whether it's managing and overseeing or doing, and at least 12 weeks or more a year of pure vacation and adventure travel around the world, first class. Why first class? Because why the fuck not? Like, I'm not a kid anymore, right? I did the backpacking and I think it's awesome. But to me, like, that, I want to create experiences like you want to create experiences. And part of that is like immersing yourself in other cultures and in other, like, and I'm curious for one last thing on your end, why you travel, and we expose you to this on purpose. To me, there is nothing more enlightening and mind expanding than to take yourself out of like New Jersey and pop yourself in like Barcelona or Norway or Copenhagen or any of the countries that we have visited,
or Montana, or Idaho. Like, even in America.
In America, you can go anywhere, and it's like, guess what? People are having good lives all over the world, and they live differently than we do, and there's such different ways of doing this that are all good. Like, you don't want to get myopic and think that what you have is all there is. So what's your take on travel?
What is my take? I love traveling. It's my single favorite thing I do.
Yeah.
Why I like it? I think it really comes down to a couple things. Some that you hit on. Like, it expands your belief of what happens in the world because you get very caught up in your day, your life, your city, your town, your friends. And then you go to a random country and you're like, oh shit. They're like I was in Madrid 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and they're just happier. I don't know how their economy functions because I don't think they work, but they're so much happier people. It's crazy. Yeah. And then you bounce around like New York. First, I was in Chicago 2 days ago, and in Chicago, you see the differences between there and New York. And I just love traveling because you get change of pace.
Yeah.
And you see how different people live their lives and what their values are. And you can pull your favorite parts of each city, bring them home with you, their values, and apply them in your day-to-day life. But I'd hope that anything I'm doing long-term involves the ability to have flexibility on travel, whether that's living in abroad or in different places or working, and having the ability to just travel a ton.
Yeah. So just to kind of tie this up in a bow, maybe we can share with everybody, like, why are we doing this? And what are we hoping to create? Because one of my future goals, personally, was, like, who do I want to be a hero to? I used to have a lot of, like, lofty answers, and maybe even on one of the previous podcasts I gave.
You have one 3 days ago.
I had one. Oh, it was very, very philosophically sound. I slept on it, and it was really easy. I want to be a hero to you, to Logan, and to Lily, and to Mom. That's who I want to be a hero to. Period. Okay? And that is why I wanted to do this podcast, because I fucking love my family. I love the time I get to spend with you. I would do it for free for the rest of my freaking life, obviously. And I find this stimulating and fun, and I want to, like, hang out with you and meet other cool, interesting people living amazing lives that have wisdom to share, and just keep learning and sharing and learning and sharing and hanging with my son. That's my motivation.
I think mine's probably very similar in the fact that I look at you as my hero and I want to spend time with you. And really, like, I love doing the podcast for 5 years or however long I did it because you just get to talk to fascinating people. And selfishly, I love doing that anyway.
Yeah.
And I got to share it with an audience of people that love doing it anyway. And I think you bring a unique perspective. A lot of my friends go to you for mentorship and advice and all of that stuff. So it was like, it'd be awesome to do it with you. And I hope we can have conversations. My theme on this entire thing is I want to have conversations with my dad as if it's me, my dad, our guest, and two random people who've never met our guest before. And it's a friendly conversation. And we're letting them explain their lives however they see fit under that circumstance. And we're going to share those with you. And we hope you guys enjoy it. And Dad, I'm so pumped we're doing this together. And thanks for taking the time today.
Me too. And I love you.
Love you. See you guys.
All right. Bye, guys.